How's it going, YouTube? Coming at you today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is we're to Handtrap the Dictionary Edition, and I just want to take a moment and say thank you all so very much for 13,000 subscribers. I want to take this video today and just give it as a gift to you, because today we're going to be doing about an hour-long Where to Handtrap with about 30 decks, which is pretty insane, the longest one I've ever put out. There's a ton to cover today, so I'm very excited to get right into it. If you haven't already went to Imperium Duelist or Dragon Shield, definitely go ahead and check them out, and since we hit 13,000 subscribers, you already know that we still have the giveaway going on with Sun Avalon, so go ahead and comment down below for your chance to win this. I'm very excited to be able to give this deck away in particular. This is just a deck that I've had for a long time, something that I've really enjoyed, and I really want the opportunity to share it with somebody who hasn't got to play the deck yet, or somebody who really wants to play the deck, especially with it becoming meta now. I just think that this is an amazing giveaway to be able to have, so definitely go ahead and comment down below for your chance to win, and let's hop right on into the content. So the first deck that I have for you today is going to be Swordsoul. So this deck is very prevalent in our meta right now, and it definitely took up half the YCS. So Crow is really solid against Despia right now, but it's not very good against Swordsoul. But there still is a really cool interaction that you can use against Swordsoul. So a really common play that you'll see now is that they'll go Taya into Boxia, then Boxia bring back Mo Yi. When they're going to bring back the Mo Yi, you just Crow out the Mo Yi. And at that point, you really do shut them off of a draw and an extra interruption through Dragite or Berserker or whatever else they were going to go into, which is really impactful because sometimes it's even their only line to like Chi-Shao too. So I really do like this play a lot. Definitely go ahead and Crow out the Mo Yi. Again, it's not a very good card, especially with cards like Adara, but at the same time, I feel like this is still, for game one, really not a bad interaction. So moving on from this though, definitely go ahead and Imperm or Valor the Chi-Shao, and the reason being is that if they have Heavenly Dragon Circle and you Imperm or Valor the Taya or the Mo Yi, then you're realistically wasting a hand trap, whereas if you Imperm or Valor the Chi-Shao, they have to either circle away their Chi-Shao for the long one or the blackout that they needed, or they just eat the Imperm and leave the Chi-Shao on board because they don't want to put up extra monsters just to make a Shaman and waste another card just to bring back a Chi-Shao. Usually you'll see where the Chi-Shao will just be like negated for the turn instead. So this is something that I think is really impactful because, again, you want your hand traps to mean more, and especially not playing into things like Circle, because then you just waste a hand trap that goes Shatana and then it never mattered, right? Then the last thing here for the first page is going to be the Sinister Sovereign. If you're playing like Brave, or if you're playing a deck that can't really deal with this card, I definitely recommend going ahead and just waiting for Imperm on your turn to just negate this, since this is such a problematic card, especially if you're playing the Brave Engine though, because this card actually just beats the Brave Engine all day long. But there are a couple other ways you can hit this deck. If you're on Ogre, which I always just think that Ogre is the most underrated hand trap possible, you can go ahead and Ogre the Taya or the Mo Yi as well, which is equally impactful, just leaving them with just a token. When it comes to Ash, if they ever circle something away immediately, it means that their hands are really bad and that you can go ahead and just Ash that. But that's probably like the lowest priority here. I would say that Emergence would be like the #1 card to just Ash. If you see Desires come first, then you can obviously just Ash that instead. But if I ever see an Emergence, I just Ash it. I really don't feel like Ash is that good against Swordsoul in the first place. It really just doesn't do enough. But there's still enough interaction in the deck that even after siding, when I take one or two out, there's still a couple cards that are pretty worth ashing. There's also this interaction right here that I want to talk about, is that don't ash the Ashuna. I feel like that's really incorrect now, because if they're using the Tennies to make a Chi-Shao, you just ash the Chi-Shao if they haven't done Emergence or like Desires yet, because if you watch what they're doing, they lock themselves into Worms, and then they go Adara and Vishuddha just to make one Chi-Shao. And if you ash that, a lot of times there's not a whole lot that they still have. And this was a really important piece for them to get to a blackout or to a long one. So I really do like this play a lot. I think that it's very impactful. And this is just something where if you haven't already seen another Ash target, this is where I would be using my Ash all day long. So for the next deck that we have here is going to be Floowandereeze. This is a deck that I get a lot of questions about because the deck just seems like it has unlimited cards, right? It can be very frustrating to beat just because it just has so many different ways to be able to get back into the game, even if it feels like it's behind. So the first way that I would like to hit this deck is always just going to be going ahead and Ghost Ogreing the map. Again, Ghost Ogre is just such a good card generically in the format, but it's never like one of the better hand traps, right? Unless it's like the Brave format that we just came out of. But definitely using Ogre on the map is really impactful. This is kind of the same argument here as Chi-Shao, because of Advent, that you should just go ahead and Imperm or Valor the Empen, because either what happens is they eat the Imperm, they leave Empen on the board, and they don't get Barrier Statue, or they go trap plus barrier statue and they advent away their Empen, which means that if it's game 2 or 3 and you have twin or cosmic, you get rid of the trap and then all you have to do is deal with the barrier statue, and that's really not that hard to accomplish, which I really like this play a lot because it just makes it to where your opponent just doesn't net as much advantage, and you're essentially forcing them to either just not have a barrier statue or not have an Empen. So it's one or the other usually. Unless they did like the map combo first and then they still have like the barrier statue, but I still feel like it's correct to just deny them the trap at least, because in the trap, if you're playing certain decks, even like a rogue deck where like the book really does matter, then I'd rather just deal with the monsters rather than dealing with like a Book of Moon, right? It also makes cards like Lightning Storm a lot better if you open like Imperm Lightning Storm, if you like Imperm the Impen, so you don't have to worry about the trap being chained to Lightning Storm, and then going into cards like Avian anyway. So I really do like the Imperm Veiler and the Impen. Now, talking about Ashe, it's kind of the same thing that I put Advent here. It's the same reason I put Circle there, is that if they ever use Advent right away and banish like an Empen because their hand's really bad, then you should just Ashe that immediately because that just means their hand's terrible. But usually it's the first bird that you see because of the fact that you don't want their cards to start getting chain blocked and then the Ashe doesn't matter. If I ever see Prosperity drop first, though, I'm usually just ashing that because usually they're looking for either a bird or the map, and that means that if you have like an Imperm or a Veiler, that it's really just game over the second that they summon like an Eglin, because you can just assume that they might have like the Tribute Summon, and you just go ahead and negate the Eglin over anything, because again, you just got to put them on you don't have a Tribute Summon in the hand. So this is definitely the best bird to negate, but if you ever have an Ashe and they normal summon a bird, then it's just always the best thing to Ashe the first bird unless they use like map effect, right? Because at that point it's already chain blocked anyways. The next deck that I have for you here is going to be ABC. So again, Ghost Ogre, insane, on field spells especially. So using Ghost Ogre on Hanger, really impactful, just really being able to deny them a lot of their extension. Using Crow on C specifically. So a lot of the ratios you'll see in the deck is 3-2-2 or 2-2-2. And so what's the biggest importance about this is even before when they're running 3-3-2, the lowest letter is always going to be C. You always just see at least 2 copies of C. They'll never run 3 copies. And so if you can go ahead and use things like Crow, Shark Cannon, Call by the Grave, whatever you have to banish the C's out of the graveyard, very quickly you'll learn that they can't really play the game anymore. The most that they can go for is like an Axis Code play or like a Baguska. Because the second that you get rid of the C's, it's no longer available for them to make the ABC Dragon Buster, and their deck doesn't really accomplish too much, which is pretty insane. So definitely go ahead and start crowing out the C's as soon as you can. Also, with Ashe, I really do feel like it's impactful to just immediately hit the Coliseum. This is by far the one thing that you really should be ashing, because Regulus is not only a negation, it's an extender. But if you see the Enchantress drop first, then you have to negate that. If you see neither of these, then you just go ahead and ash the B effect. If you are in a situation where you open a Veiler, Veiler is not very good against this deck, so you can go ahead and just Veiler the Platinum Gadget. It's pretty strong because of the fact that they still need to get the last piece out of their hand, so I think that this is still very impactful. Some players will still go for like the barricade blocker, but I still think that Platinum Gadget comes up enough that Veiler on it is still really impactful. The other way that you can hit this deck too, and this is really in particular to what you're playing, so if they go Baguska Pass, definitely just hold the Imperm for your turn if you're worried about like Baguska. And then the other ways that you can hit this deck is that if you don't care about a banish, I would really recommend that you Imperm the IP because of the play for either the Appaloosa for 4 that's also protected from card effects, or they can use the Underworld Goddess and then super poly your monster essentially. So the other way that you can do it is if you really care about the banish, then you can just go ahead and Imperm the ABC Dragon Buster and force out the pieces to get summoned. But you just got to realize that either an Underworld Goddess or an Appaloosa is going to be following. So that's always going to be problematic, right? So this is something that I definitely recommend that you kind of think about before you start playing into the board. But saving the Imperm for your turn sometimes is just the best way that you can do this, because the Imperm on their turn doesn't really do enough, but being able to force out some kind of action is really important here. So moving on here into Salamangreat. Salamangreat hasn't really changed a ton, but there still is quite a few different ways you can hand trap this deck. Definitely going ahead and using Crow or Bell on the Jaguar. Still the best extender and also with 4, so you're being able to shut down the Baguska play, which again, if you're playing Despia, is a very scary play, so you want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Also using Imperm or Veiler on the second effect of the Wolf so they can't get to Rage or Roar, coming back off of the Gazelle effect. I always recommend to go ahead and negate the second effect of the Wolf versus the monster effect. And the reason being is because like the monsters don't really do a lot, and they might have a hand trap or two, but usually you can tell like what you have to play through on the board too. And the monsters really aren't that scary as they don't really have effects on the field that are like relevant, nor are they omni negates. So definitely go ahead and shut down the access to the trap cards. There is an argument to say that you can just crow out the trap cards as well in case that they just relink and try to reset Roar off its own effect. But that's always my most preferred way, is to just try to get the trap cards out of the game as soon as possible so that you only have to worry about like an access code potential on like the turn 3, right? So going into the other ways you can hit the deck though is the Heat Soul variant. It's really like 20 hand traps and very little engine, so I recommend using Ghost Ogre and Heat Soul, because even if they have 6 cards in hand, it's very unlikely that they actually have engine left. So just go ahead and imperm and try to deal with the Heat Soul as soon as possible. You can even just Ghost Ogre, get it off the board, and just deny them draws, because it's really funny that they play so little engine that if they don't see it and you kill the Heat Soul, they can have a really hard time trying to play the game. And this is specifically the Heat Soul variant, but it's still really impactful to be able to go ahead here and get rid of the Heat Soul as soon as possible. Also going ahead and ashing the Mirage Thalia is going to bring out the Gazelle, or just waiting for the Gazelle effect, so again, you don't have to deal with the trap cards as much as possible. So the next deck that I have for you here is going to be Despia. So Despia is a deck that got second place at the YCS, and it's still very impactful into our format. It's still going to be one of the most prevalent decks that you're going to have to play around. So ashing Branded Fusion, it's still 110% correct. It's still the best spot at which you can hand trap. I do believe that a lot of people are playing Mourner still because they want to go ahead and shut down the Aluber. I don't mind this, but I still think that Imperm Veiler is more impactful. I know that the opening is going to get around the Veiler, but I still don't know if running the Mourner is relevant enough yet. I still just like the Imperm or Veiler, but make sure that you're negating the Aluber at all means necessary, because at that point they're going to get to Lost, or if they don't have Branded Fusion, then they get to Branded Fusion. And getting to Lost just means that your interruptions in your hand and what you could be doing on your turn are increasingly minimal, because of the fact that no matter what happens, if they resolve like Branded and Rud, then they're going to be able to do a whole lot without you being able to respond to them. So I always recommend going ahead and negating the Aluber. Also, using Crow-like effects on things like Branded and Red, Branded Banishment to make sure that they can't extend into things like Chimera, other Masquerades, bringing back their Mirror Jade, because turn 1 Mirror Jades are usually used, so on turn 2 they're not live. So this is a really impactful hand trap spot to make sure that these don't go off and just extend into more monsters. So there's also the branded Predaplant deck that we saw really have the breakout at the YCS, which was pretty cool to see, honestly, because this deck is really unique. It uses a lot of the newer cards that we just haven't seen yet. So using Mourner in this build in particular actually is pretty good, because this build plays 3 opening and 1 Aluber, so it's almost always being dropped in the draw phase. So Mourner against the Aluber here is really strong. You still want to go ahead and shut down the Branded Fusion. I have the Ash negating the Predapractice, which I still think is a really strong card, and you should just go ahead and Ash. If you don't see Branded Fusion coming down, then this is just like the best Ash target, and it's still arguable if you want to Ash one or the other. They're both very, very strong, so you just got to realize that like the Branded Fusion is going to get them into their Predapractice engine, and then if you Ash the Predapractice, it's kind of already dealing with the problem that they were going to get to if they were going to Branded Fusion anyway. So I think that ashing the Predapractice is going to eventually end up being more impactful than ashing Branded Fusion in this variant alone. But you know, just kind of take that with a grain of salt, test it out yourself. This one's a little bit newer, but I definitely believe that going ahead and ashing the Predapractice is going to be the better spot to hand trap. Also, using the Imperms, the Veilers, the Mourners on the Amble is really important, because this fusion's insane. and so it just nets a lot of advantage that you just don't want them to be able to get to, especially because one instant fusion is full combo. So this is by far the best spot to hand trap on any form of Veiler, Imperm, Mourner, right onto the Amble instead of using it on like the Eluger. I think that this is just, again, way more impactful. So moving on from here, though, we have Adventurer Synchro. Adventurer Synchro is a really cool deck. It can main deck a ton of hand traps. It has the Scythe combo. It has the Brave cards, which protect the Punk cards. We have the Red Rose engine. There's so many different lines of play that you can use in this deck, and I really do like it a lot for that because I feel like the deck's so versatile, and it's honestly becoming one of my favorite decks of the format just because you can have so many different lines of play. So definitely go ahead and use things like Crow onto Scythe because we want to make sure that you're not going to get Scythe locked, where if you are afraid of being Scythe locked, I do recommend siding cards like Mystic Mine, because where they tell you that you're not able to play the game because you get Scythe locked, you then activate Mystic Mine and then you're like, you can't play the game. So I think that's really funny. And it's kind of like an out to an out, right? Because you were either going to get OTK'd in the follow-up turn, or you're going to mine your opponent and tell them that they just lose because you have mine on the board, which is pretty crazy. So when it comes to Ash Blossom here, you want to go ahead and Ash Blossom the Enchantress, of course. You want to make sure that they don't have protection on the combo. But if they don't have the Brave Engine, then you can go ahead and Ash the Hulk of Fibrax. I think that this is the most impactful Ash because you don't let them get to Red Rose, which means Baron and an even further combo. If they don't have either of these yet, I do recommend hitting the Foxy Tune because this is always going to be really nice to get to another tuner so they can go into Hulk, they can get into Deer Note, so they can go into Chaotic Ruler. I still think in the most importance of ashing anything here is going to be Enchantress, then Hulk, then Foxy Tune. But in the awkward situation where they don't have much of a hand, ashing the Foxy Tune really isn't that bad of a choice either. Using Imperm on your turn against the Hulk is really impactful too in the draw or standby phase because you don't want them to be able to tag out and then go into other synchro plays as well. Especially trying to go into their Wonder Magician to pop Scythe and then go into Baron. So definitely make sure that you're impriming Hulk on the draw or standby phase of your turn, and then Veilering the Chaotic Ruler if you have Veiler to make sure that they don't get those mills in the ad. So next up here we have Punk Therion, and this deck is very similar to Adventurer Synchro, but we still have other cards that we're looking out for this time, and that's going to be still impriming the Hulk on your draw or standby phase, and that's because this deck is going to be doing the Calamity combo instead of the Scythe lock. So Calamity is really scary, and there's actually other ways that you can go ahead and deny them Calamity, and that's going to be crowing or belling the Chaotic Ruler in the graveyard because it's a key piece in doing that combo. So make sure that you are clearing that and you really won't have to worry about too much. Using Veiler on your opponent's turn on their Chaotic Ruler, again, just hold that Imperm. I promise you it'll do a lot better for you on your turn. Also, using things like Ash on the Therion Disc Coliseum, you want to make sure that you go ahead and negate that if you see that right away. But if they don't have Coliseum, then you're going to go ahead and just absolutely Ash the Foxy Tune. Still very correct in this matchup, but definitely go ahead and clear the Chaotic Ruler or Imperm that Hulk to make sure that you do not lose to Calamity. The combo, it's really Glass Cannon, but it's still something that you really got to look out for. So the next deck here is going to be Sun Avalon. Sun Avalon is by far one of my favorite decks that has been released. I think that it's really fun to play, and it definitely has some choke points though. Using Imperm or Veiler on the Jasmine is insanely impactful. This is something that is a huge cutoff for the deck. So if you have the opportunity to go ahead and negate Jasmine, you absolutely do that. Using Ash on Sowing, don't use it on the tree because the Link 1 tree really doesn't do that much if you Ash it because they still have a lot of extenders that they can play to get into things like Jasmine. Even using Ash on Jasmine at that point, if they don't have a way to like the Sowing, is still pretty impactful, but I'd always just wait for the Sowing and then Imperm or Veiler on the Jasmine. Also, if you have that Crow game 1 situation, go ahead and Crow at the Loci because they can't use Twin to reborn it, and then they can't use the Melius to keep reborning the Loci either without trying to get to another one through searches or a special summon, which makes a lot of play lines really awkward, to be completely honest. So this is something else that is just a really impactful game 1 situation to go ahead and just Crow out the Loci. So the next deck that I have for you today is going to be Drytron. Drytron is by far one of the better decks that we have right now. Definitely my top 5. It's really insane, especially with the second Ben 10, which was so crazy that we got that back too, right? And it definitely showed that it's a good deck at the YCS getting 3rd place. So I want to make sure that you are as prepared as possible for this deck as well. So definitely going to go ahead and crow out the Alpha in the graveyard if they use it from the grave. You can go ahead and crow the Ben 10 if it gets tributed for cost, and that way it doesn't resolve. Also, they usually only play 1 copy of Meteonis Drytron, so if you do remove that from play, it makes a lot of play lines extremely awkward because they can't ritual summon anymore, right? So I really like this one in particular because if they are not able to ritual summon out their Natasha by the time that you go ahead and crow out the Meteonis Drytron, not even Natasha is a big concern in this matchup. So it definitely proves to be really strong if you can go ahead and use Crow at any point in this matchup. Crow is one of the best cards that you can use against this matchup. Also using things like Valor or Imperm against the Mubeta Fafnir, really impactful so they can't use the materials as ritual fodder and they don't get the Foolish Burial of a monster as well, because you got to realize, that's why I really like Ashing Nova, is there's not a whole lot of ways for them to get to other Drytron names outside of things like Mubeta or their Nova. So if they really want to get into like a Gamma to keep extending and get a bigger board, ashing things like Nova, in my opinion, is just really impactful, because especially if they don't have Alpha already, it just makes their play lines even more awkward, and they really rely on their Mubeta Fafnir at that point. So all these are really high impact hand trap spots, especially against Drytron. Moving on to my favorite deck of all time, Sky Striker, the YCS winner. I really want to make sure that you know how to play against this deck because it is so versatile, and ashing something like Engage seems really simple, but I still see a lot of ashes coming down on Rotas, which I don't really love, especially if they already open Ray, Rose, Drone, Engage. There's so many different cards you can go ahead and ash instead, even like Desires, but more importantly Engage. That I think is just so much better, especially because there's really specific scenarios where if you don't have a way to Bell, Imperm, Valor your opponent, and you know that they're going to be able to resolve Engage at least once if you have an Ash in hand, sometimes you can just let them resolve the first Engage and then Ash the second one, because usually by the time the second one comes down, they'll have the 3 spells engraved, and the second one usually searches like a Widow Anchor or like a Shark Cannon and gets them another draw. So I always love ashing the second one, which comes up quite a bit, especially if you're playing against the mirror match. So this is just something that you can consider, and again, very specific scenarios, but I still really love this idea to go ahead and just ash the second Engage, but again, it really does depend. The next way that you can hit this deck is going ahead and using Bell, the Imperm, the Valor onto Kagari's effect, belling Ray effect in the graveyard if you really need to be able to clear the Link monster. Same thing with Crow. If you need to like crow a Ray, you can, but I always like just going ahead and crowing the Kagari target, especially if it's like Engage or Widow Anchor. Both are very impactful cards, and you want to make sure that you get rid of them as soon as possible, because especially Anchors on a late game situation and stealing the board is insane. So just make sure that you're on top of either clearing the Link and Ray, or you're specifically going for the spell count, because if they can't get to spell count, then it's going to be a really rough time to be able to gain any advantage. Moving off of Sky Striker, though, we have D-to-D. So D-to-D is a deck that we even saw top 32 at the YCS, and it's still something that's very prevalent in our meta. Even though it's not really that popular, it's still something that we can see pop up at any single time because the deck is still fairly strong. So definitely going ahead and Imperming or Valoring on the Gilgamesh. You should not worry about Imperming on anything else except the Gilgamesh. This is 100% the correct spot. Also going ahead and ashing the Dark Contract with the Gate, or you can go ahead and just ash the Copernicus as well. Both very impactful. So another way that you can hit this deck is going to be going ahead and using Bell on Necroslime or Swamp King to deny the fusion plays, but also using cards like Ghost Ogre on the Swamp King or the Gate. These are extremely important because if you deny the fusion play, you deny the search, but you also deny the Mocking Next XCs because it really needs to be able to send a contract. So that just means that Ogre is just so insane against this matchup, and it's very versatile. Also, using Crow on the Griffin to get reborn so they can't get to their headhunt or their additional searches. Also, you can crow out the Necroslime if you don't have Bell to make sure that the extra fusion play also doesn't happen here. But moving away from D-to-D, we have Ignister. This is a deck that also got top 32 at the YCS. That was really cool because they have Heat Soul now, and the deck is just really resilient to a lot of hand traps that I really like about this deck, honestly. And being able to put up the towers, sometimes a lot of decks just can't out it. So it's almost always correct just to go ahead here and negate the Link one just because you have to put them on that you don't have Field Spell. But there are other ways so you can go ahead and hand trap this deck, utilizing cards like Bell, Valor, and Imperm, just to make sure that you can go ahead and not get OTK'd by Transcode Update. update jammer, but you can also go ahead and use cards like Ghost Ogre against Heat Soul and Templar, because Templar has to have the monster summoned to the zones that it points to. I really like Ghost Ogre as a hand trap. I think that it's one of the most underrated ones that we have, and it's definitely utilized the least. I think that in the formats that it's really good in, it's insane, but the formats that it's just very average in, it's just not very good against the better decks. It's only really good against more rogue options, so that's why I don't see it a whole lot, but it does have a lot of application in many different formats. So the next deck that I want to cover is going to be Earth Machine. Earth Machine hasn't really changed a whole lot lately, just because like Brutal Dozer is still the card that you want to Ash Valor Imperm, because this is just be all end all, one of the best spots that you can go ahead and hand trap this deck. Otherwise, it's really small things like going ahead and belling the Citadel in the graveyard, or crowing out the Rune Forest, just so you don't have to deal with such a big monster on the board in like the negation in the battle phase. But other than that, Earth Machine hasn't really changed a whole lot outside of getting like the Therion package. But even then, I don't even think that was like that impactful to move this deck up any tiers. But I do like this deck as being a solid rogue option at the moment, just because the deck does have a lot of really nice plays it can do, especially with an Omni Negate now. We'll just have to see what the deck can really accomplish moving forward. So the next deck that I have for you is going to be Heroes. And so if you're not familiar with what Destiny Hero Dark Angel is, you need to make sure that if you're playing Destiny or Striker, that you're very aware of how to out this card. You need some form of Bell or Crow to deny it being able to be summoned to your side of the board. The second it gets summoned to your board, the second that you activate a spell card, on resolution, this card will just negate it. And it's not once per turn. And so it's really crazy the fact that this card will just essentially shut down an entire Despia deck. So you need to make sure that you have some form of out for this card, because especially the first turn combo board that they put up, if you don't have like Nibiru or something to really be able to answer the board, this card is really problematic. So make sure that you have some form of out for Dark Angel. Also, Fusion Destiny, of course, is used in this deck the best out of any other deck, so make sure that you have the Ash Blossom for that. Using it on, like, a Hero Lives is okay. Usually they have at least some extender or, like, some starter in their hand, too, so I probably wouldn't even waste it on that. I'd probably just specifically wait for the Fusion Destiny, honestly. I think it's just better. And then going ahead and using a Valor or Imperm on the Cross Crusader, because that's just a lot of their extension, and you just really don't want that card to resolve. So this would be probably the most impactful spots for me when I'm playing as Heroes, especially Dark Angel. That card's insane, so make sure that you're aware that that's in the format now. So as for the next deck, is going to be Plunder Patrol, and I didn't really put down a ton for this deck. You can Ash Enchantress, but I really feel like the most impactful interaction in this deck is quite literally just ashing one of the ships. You can let Whitebeard resolve, you can let Blackbeard resolve, but if you lose to like a banish on your normal summon, then why not just hold the Ash for like a Moark? Because if you go Lokai and then they change Lokai's attribute with the booty to like dark and they make Moark and they attempt to banish your Lokai, and then you Ash the Moark, a lot of their end boards is usually like Blackbeard with a Handtrap, and it's not really even that threatening, especially if you already opened up like the Ash Blossom. So just using Ash against any of the ships is usually one of the best ways that you can actually shut down this deck. The other way is that you can bell the booty as well, which is equally fine. I just really like the idea of going ahead and ashing one of the ships instead of using it on something like a Whitebeard. So definitely keep that in mind, and I think this is going to be really important if you ever play against this deck in the future. So next up is Pendulum, and I've actually been thinking about bringing this to a regional this weekend because I feel like it's just such a good meta call, and it has a lot of good matchups right now, especially being against Despia and making cards like Baguska. The card's insane against Despia. Also having cards like the Scythe package, not so bad either. So just to be able to make sure that we don't lose to this deck, definitely go ahead and Imperm Baguska on your turn if it's a card that you just lose to. Otherwise, you can Imperm the Hulk on your turn if you lose to the Scythe package, because you need to make sure that they can't get to their Wonder Magician. Sometimes you can still see a Tornado Dragon get summoned, and that's unfortunate. But the better way to just stop the deck altogether is going ahead and using the Imperm on your turn against the Hulk if they don't already have the Tornado Dragon. The other thing too is going to be utilizing Valor on their turn to stop the Tuning Magician from being summoned, so they can't just go Hulk, Selene, and Access Code OTK. Also, utilizing cards like DD Crow and Ghost Bell on Scythe to make sure that you don't get Scythe locked. Again, like I said earlier, you might want to consider siding Mystic Mine if you are afraid of cards like Scythe, because at that point, you might not be able to play the game, but on the follow-up turn, they're not playing the game. So it's just kind of an out for an out. And then always going ahead to Ash the Pendulum Call, which is still very impactful. You want to make sure that you go ahead and do that. Instant Scales is something that we don't want to see happen against us, right? So the next deck that we have here, though, is going to be Live Twin. I really like this deck, and I feel like when Desires went to 1, it really got hurt because the Desires essentially always drew you into like 2 hand traps in this deck. So with Desires coming back to more than 1 now, I feel like this deck has another chance to really play and do well. So although ashing Desires against this deck is very good, I still feel like ashing the Lila is still really insane, because at that point they don't get to Frost and they don't get the additional draw, and it's just another thing that just nets them more advantage to be able to draw essentially twice per turn, right? Because they get the Kiss Kill draw and then they get like the Frost draw, and then on your turn you get the Kiss Kill draw and you get like your draw for turn. So that's pretty crazy. So I typically always just ash the Lila, and then you also go ahead and just Valor or Imperm the first link 2 that they make. I think it's just the most impactful personally. Also going with the DD Crow on the Lila in the graveyard. Yes, they don't target when they go to Reborn with like Sunny, but they only have 1 Lila to go ahead and blow something up. You just go ahead and just use Crow to get rid of the one that's in the graveyard. Or you can go ahead and Crow away the Trouble Sunny so they can't just like send something off the board, which is equally very good. And then Bell is just the best hand trap against this deck because Belling Trouble Sunny is just insane. So definitely make sure that you have Bell handy if you are playing against Live Twin. I know that sometimes it's not always in the format, but it's still one of the most impactful cards against this deck. So the next thing that I want to talk about here is going to be Eldlich. Now, the Trap Eldlich and then the Branded Eldlich, they're pretty close because both builds still play like Seal Drain. They just don't play the same number of Floodgates, but like they still play a lot of similar cards. In this variant, though, definitely going ahead and impriming or valoring the Albion is still really impactful for no Mirror Jade. Belling out the Haquero or the Sanguine is still very impactful. Same thing with ashing the Sanguine. You just want to just make sure that they don't get to the Golden Lord as much as possible. Also, ashing the Branded Fusion is still very impactful here as well, because that's just another way, again, for them to get to the Golden Lord. And then always going ahead and DD Crowing out the Golden Lord, because typically they only play 2, and once those are gone, they have to strictly rely on their Branded Fusion package, and then after that, it's pretty much just GG. Moving on from Eldlich though, Infernoid. This is a deck that I really wanted to mention because I feel like this is something that doesn't really get talked about a lot, but this does pop up here and there, and I really want to make sure that you are ready for it. So Decatron is the one on the left here. You want to make sure that you Imperm Valor this card. It essentially is able to send an Infernoid from the deck to the grave and copy its effects by sending P.U.N.K or sending like the Deviati. Getting to be a monster negate or a spell and trap negate is really impactful, so you want to make sure that you have some way to shut this down, because it also just gets them an additional name in graveyard, especially if they send like the Antondel or the Seismitus, that you want to make sure that they're not just getting free advantage because this card was just summoned and you didn't negate it. You definitely don't ash that card, but using cards like Valor or Imperm is still very impactful. Ogre on the Vanishment is still very nice as well, because they go pitch 1 and then they add another Void card, and I always like making sure that this card just doesn't resolve, getting to the Feast, getting to Imagination. Then ashing Imagination is 110% your first priority. Feast would be number 2, and then Vanishment is number 3, because at that point if you have Ash and you Ash Vanishment and they already had Imagination, then you still just lose because of Imagination. But if they're going first, it's still fine just to let them get to Feast and then just ash the Feast. Sometimes they'll have like 2, but they had to hard open one of them, so I'd rather just go ahead and ash the one that I know is there and just try to play around the second one. But ash in this matchup is insane. It's as good as the matchup as like Plunder Patroll, right? Because there's so many really solid ash targets, but make sure you hit like Feast or Imagination in this matchup because they're just so good. But also don't play into Gamma, because there's a lot of Infernoid builds that do play Gamma, so just try to make sure that you play around that as best you can, but just know that it's there. So moving past this though, we have Cyber Dragon. This is a deck that we're probably going to end up seeing at some point in the meta just because of the Therion cards, but you're still just ashing the Therion Coliseum right away, just because like that's just another negation on the board, so you can't use your other cards anyways if you open up another hand trap, but otherwise you're just ashing the Machine Dupe. Utilizing cards like Infinite Impermanence and Valor on the Cyber Dragon core is still very correct because that card's insane. And then if they Machine Dupe, they can't summon Cyber Dragons, they have to summon cores, which sometimes is still just fine, but I would rather them summon cores than Cyber Dragons, right? So equally just very good. Also, DD Crow on whatever not sure targets in the graveyard is also just a very good time to be able to remove a potential threat from the board. So Madolche is also a deck that we've been seeing pop up here and there that I think has been really interesting to see coming out of the meta, because there's cards like the D Shifter that it plays. You have cards like Promenade. And there's a lot of really insane combos that I've been seeing out of the Madolche deck still, with the Brave cards as well. Now, the deck still isn't the most consistent from what I've seen, but it's still something that you got to make sure that you know how to play against it. So ashing the Enchantress is fine, but that's just something you kind of have to do. Otherwise, you're just going to go ahead and negate the Angeli or the Petting Cestor when it hits the field and it tries to go ahead and summon from the deck. Make sure that you have an Imperm, a Veiler, or an Ash handy. And then also have the Ghost Bell or the Crow for the Hoot Cake. If they go like D-Shifter and then they have like Hoot Cake to like banish D-Shifter, you want to make sure you have some kind of answer for that. Moving off of Madolche, we have Tri-Brigade. Tri-Brigade is pretty standard as to what it's always been. You can Imperm, Veiler, or Ash the Rescue Cat. I didn't put it on here because I was looking at basically just the Tri-Brigade engine, because it really depends on which variant you play against, right? If you play against like the one that they're just playing like Rescue Cat, then you can go ahead and interact with the cat always. But at the same time, against like the standard engine, you just go ahead and Imperm Veiler, whichever one is summoned first, to go ahead and banish 2. Ashing the Fractal, you can Bell the Revel or Imperm the Appaloosa. If you're playing against like the Obedient Schooled engine, they're still playing Rescue Cat. So it's really just like if they have Rescue Cat first, you ash that. If they have Obedient School first, you ash that. If they're playing the Bird Up engine, I would always just go ahead and either Imperm or Bell the Warbler still. That's still correct, 100%. And then Ash the Bird Call, beside Fractal, is still like a really solid hit too, because if they open up with Fractal and then they send Cobalt, then you're in the same situation. So it's really just like, whichever one's first, Fractal or Bird Call, I would ash whichever one, because that just reads really hard into the fact that they could potentially have things like Warbler in hand already too. So you just want to make sure that you're prepared for that. So the next deck that I have for you today is going to be Burning Abyss, and I feel like this deck really isn't that prevalent, but it's still something that I think that we should note here, because you really need to use DD Crow or Bell to be able to stop the Dante Seer loop, because it's just going to end up being like, add this back, summon this back to the board, and really be able to keep netting advantage that way. So just make sure that if you are playing against a Burning Abyss deck, that you are going to go ahead and just break this loop, because it's the most important thing that you can do against the deck. The next matchup here is Phantom Knight, and so doing the Phantom Knight deck, I felt like I had to include Burning Abyss too, just because it's something that isn't always very prevalent, but it's a deck that we still see from time to time. So Phantom Knight, though, you really want to make sure that you Bell or Crow the effect of Torn Scale in the graveyard whenever it's trying to reborn itself. Still really impactful, especially the fact that like you can hand trap this deck a little bit more freely now since the Verte isn't relevant anymore. So then you can use Ash on things like Cloak. You can Ash even the Rusty effect. You can Veiler it. You can Imperm it. And you can also Bell the effect of Fogblade in the graveyard whenever they try to bring back like Breaksword to pop their Scythe, because they still do that too. So you just got to make sure that you're aware of that as well. But stopping the Rusty is now like one of the best things that you can do. And then also getting rid of the Torn Scale in the graveyard when it tries to reborn itself is still very impactful. So make sure that you are doing that. The next deck up here is going to be Dragon Link. So Dragon Link is still going to be a deck that we see. Also with the decline of Despia, even though it's still going to be one of the better decks, we do see it getting played a little less. And then the P.U.N.K combo with Dragon is still really insane. You're going to go ahead and Crow out the Chaos Relay out of the graveyard, Belling the effect of Quad Boral. I've been seeing this used a lot more lately, so make sure that if you do have a Bell, sometimes it is kind of nice to wait for the Quad Boral. If you're in an awkward situation and it's back to your opponent's turn, they use Boot Sector's second effect, you can hold Bell for that as well. If you are an Ogre, you can go ahead and just Ogre the Boot Sector, which is crazy because this card is literally their soul charge for multiple turns. And also just going ahead and using Ash, Veiler, Imperm, of course, on that Chaotic Ruler to shut it down. If they are on the P.U.N.K cards, then I would probably just go ahead and Ash the Foxy Tune. But other than that, you can go ahead and just shut down the Chaotic Ruler as much as possible. Moving past this, Dino. We've been seeing this deck a lot, even like the FDK variant. I still feel like these are the correct ways to go ahead and hit this deck, being able to Ash or Crow the Miscellaneous Source in the graveyard so they can't go into Army Adorn and then get their free pluses. Using cards like Ghost Ogre on Lost World so that the token doesn't really matter on the board, because once the token's on the board, you can't really target anything anyway. So that's pretty insane as well. As you can use Imperm on the Ultimate Conductor Tyranno in the battle phase. I really like doing that a lot, because a lot of people feel very safe when they use Miscellaneousaurus and then they go to battle phase and they don't account for cards like Imperm or Droplet. So definitely go ahead and interact with the Ultimate Conductor Tyranno in the battle phase. This isn't particularly like a hand trapping moment here, because this is usually going to be set, but this is still something that I really want you to be aware of, because a lot of people think that once Miscellaneous is on the board, like used, that you just can't interact with the board at all, but you really can. And it's something too where like if you hold Imperm for your turn, you can even go ahead and use use Imperm on things like the Dolka, so you don't have to worry about like the double monster negate. So like there's still ways to go ahead and play around this deck, especially being able to use things like Imperm in the battle phase. I really like that a lot. That's why Imperm is so versatile, right? Because you can just use it in those situations that you can't use like Veiler, right? So I really like Imperm as a card. The next deck that I have for you here is going to be Agents, and I really like Agents as a deck right now. I think that it has a lot of potential, especially like the P.U.N.K Agent deck. I think that using cards like Ghost Belt against the Neptune is really insane, especially if you have two hand traps and you like Imperm the Venus, and then they go ahead and get rid of it, and then you use Neptune to like bring it back, and then you can go ahead and Bell the Neptune. It's just a very, very impactful hand trap here. Utilizing cards like Veiler or Imperm on the Venus or the Master Flare if it copies Venus's effect, still a very impactful hand trap here as well, just because you want to make sure that they can't get to their Shine Balls and get to the insane combo that they can do with Krishna. You can go ahead and Ash the Master Flare Hyperion if they're trying to copy the effect of Venus from the deck. You can also go ahead and negate the effect of the Diviner of the Herald once it's tributed by like Trias to summon Booten from the deck, because that way there's just a free Master Flare. So just make sure that you are on top of either ashing the second effect of Diviner, or you're going to go ahead and ash the effect of Master Flare. One of the two is very impactful. So the next deck we have here is Mekk-Knight. So I didn't include Memory on the Ash targets, but Memory is still an amazing target for Ash. If you're in the situation where that becomes relevant, definitely go ahead and Ash Memory, that's fine. But otherwise, Ash, Veiler, and Imperm all work very well against the Purple Nightfall, against Blue Sky, and against the Girsu. So the one thing about Purple Nightfall that a lot of people don't know is that it doesn't banish for cost, it targets for cost. So if they use the effect of Nightfall to go ahead and target, and they target itself or another card, and then you chain Veiler or Imperm, the effect is irrelevant at that point, and they can't get to cards like Blue Sky, and then it's stuck in the zone. And then they rely on another extender to at least be able to go into a linked monster to free up that zone again. So I really do like these targets for Ash, Veiler, Imperm. You can also do the same thing with Ghost Ogre too against the Purple Nightfall. It goes target for cost, and if it targets itself and then you Ogre it, they realistically just lose, because then they lose the Purple Nightfall and they don't have the extension that they really need to keep going. Also, using cards like Bell on Secret is probably one of the craziest interactions in the deck. Especially when they use Secret, they always use this card on activation, so using Bell to be able to just clear it off the board immediately is really insane. I really like Bell against this matchup. The next deck that I have for you is Invoke Shaddoll Dogmatica. This deck is really much so just not in the format right now. But if they use Schism on activation, you can Bell it and send it to the graveyard. Or if they use it after activation, then you can Ghost Ogre it to get around the card as well. That's why I really like Ghost Ogre too. It's so versatile in a format. And then you always just go ahead and Ash, Veiler, Imperm the Alistair, even if they're on the branded variant, because at that point they're going to have a Macabre, and then you just waste a hand trap anyways, and you let them have Macabre and the branded fusion. So you just always need to negate the Alistair, because at least you deal with one of the pieces of their board. So for the next deck that I have for you today is going to be Libromancer, and the first time that I really saw this deck in action was at the YCS, and I kept watching different people combo with it because I really want to make sure that I got the hand trap spots down for you. There's actually some really cool little loops that you can do in the deck between the Field Spell, Fire, and Geek Boy. You can either go like the first appearance, then get the Fire, and then Fire, get Geek Boy, and then you can also go like the Geek Boy, get appearance, get Fire, get a monster, or you can go the Fire, get Geek Boy, get appearance, get a monster. So there's a lot of searching in this deck, and Droll is definitely really nice against this deck, so that's something that you can consider when it comes to like sideboard or if you're remaining it. Also, using cards like Imperm on your turn to go ahead and negate the Krishna, because their end board is usually going to be like Baron plus Krishna, so you want to make sure that you're able to prevent being locked out of special summoning for the turn. But if they do have Baron, sometimes you're actually just going to need Droplet as well, which is just really imperative. It is getting another reprint soon too, so hopefully they'll be a bit cheaper for everyone to be able to get their hands on some, because that card is honestly so crazy. The next card that I want to talk about today is going to be Fire and Geek Boy together. I know it just is Fire here, but it's really either end of the combo, right? You want to be able to negate one of them. So using Ash or Veiler is going to be very impactful. Also, using cards like Ghost Ogre, again, on the field spell. You'll see this a lot in this video, is just using Ghost Ogre on the field spell always feels so good, just because at that point, you're just being able to destroy it and just not have to worry about the field spell anymore. Especially since this field spell allows them to ritual summon. So this is one that you definitely want to take off the board. But moving away from the Libromancer deck, we're going to be going to Trickstar. Again, being able to hit the light stage with Ogre so that your back row doesn't keep getting shut off. This is really impactful here because the light stage is crazy. Every single turn being able to lock down a back row. We just don't want to have to keep dealing with that, right? Also, you want to go ahead and Ash Reincarnation. I think this is really impactful here because you don't want your hand to get banished. This is something that's really unfortunate when it does happen. So just make sure that no matter what they do, don't throw Ashes on Prosperity, Candina, Light Stage. Just let those cards go through and specifically wait to go ahead and Ash the Reincarnation. You don't want to get drolled in the follow-up too and have your entire hand ripped. So this is something that's really important, and you want to make sure that you are going ahead and just Ashing Reincarnation because that card is insane, truly. It really is. But moving away from Trickstar as well, we're going to be going on to Sharks. Sharks are a deck that you'll see here and there, maybe at like a local level. You won't really see them at a higher tier event, but it's still something that you should know how to play against because Buzzsaw Shark is the card that you have to hand trap. You absolutely have to. Whether it be Ghost Ogre, whether it be Ash, Veiler, Imperm, you need to go ahead and stop this card because if Right Hand Shark comes out, Crooked Cook gets summoned, and you better be playing some form of removal because if you're not, then that's going to be a very rough game, almost impossible to win. And that's where I really recommend cards like Mystic Mine because you will just auto lose to things like Crooked Cook. So that's pretty insane. But you just have to make sure that you are shutting down the Buzzsaw. And then if they do normal summon Right Hand Shark, that you are just going ahead and removing it by means of Mirror Jade or what have you. Anything that you have to go ahead and remove it, make sure that you're doing it. It's because the Crooked Cook is really hard to out. Also, using cards like Bell on White Mirror, because White Mirror is still a really good card, and I know that Bell really isn't in the format right now, but it's still something that when it is, this is going to be one of the best cards that you can go ahead and just Bell. This is a deck that I think we will actually see at Meta Potential one day, and it's something that I'm actually very excited for, because back when Zombie Orcus was the deck, I still really liked this deck a lot. Being able to main deck things like Zombie World is pretty insane, because that card comes up quite a bit, and so I think that there is a lot of potential to say that this deck could end up being something really relevant soon, especially with just a little bit more support. We've seen so many different decks in the past where all it needed was one card and it really took off. So there's already so many cards in the Zombie Arsenal as well that I could really see this happening one day, and I really want to make sure that you know exactly how to play against this deck. So for the first thing here is going to be Glow Up Bloom with the Ash Blossom is going to be really important because they will be summoning the Bulge Rock from the deck, and especially if they already have the Zombie World live, then it has the ability to either negate the effect of a card, or you can go ahead and banish it, which is both very strong. You also have the ability to go ahead and Bell or Crow out the Bulge Rock from the graveyard, which is equally very impactful, especially if you can Crow it. Because every single standby phase, as long as there's a field spell up, you can go ahead and attempt to reborn the Bulge Rock. Also going ahead and impriming or Veilering the Unizombie to make sure that free sends are not happening in level modulation. This is also just very important because this deck really thrives on being able to send cards like Mizuki to the graveyard and really be able to keep extending their plays. So definitely make sure that you are going ahead and stopping these specific cards because they are really impactful and really imperative to the combo lines that they have. Adamancipator is a deck that we don't really see very often anymore, but I still feel like this is a deck that is pretty relevant, and it's something that if you were to bring it to a tournament, I don't think that a lot of people would be very prepared for it, especially with the fact that when you go second and you can play cards like Mystic Mine because you literally play 0 back row in the deck, it's very important because people are not ready for you to be putting in Mystic Mine, right? And it's the same thing going into like game 3 where you can activate cards like Anti-Spell because it doesn't really hurt you either. So I think this deck does have a lot of potential in our format, and if you go ahead and Ash, Veiler, or Imperm the normal summon, it is a really good way to stop the deck. But if you have any way to interact with the normal summon via destruction, if you have like a Mirror Jade effect, if you have like Offerings to the Doomed, if you have any way to be able to destroy the normal summon, it's very impactful because this deck thrives off of having a monster on the board to be able to extend the rest of their monsters out. It's kind of similar to Splite in a way because like you have to have like a rock or an Adamancipator on the board to at least keep special summoning other monsters. So it's very important that you just go ahead and get rid of the normal summon as soon as possible. But if you don't have any destruction effects, definitely make sure that you're just Ashing, Veilering, or Imperm on the normal summon, and then also using cards like Bell or Crow on the signs to make sure that they cannot get back to comboing. Very important, but again, I think that this deck has a lot of potential, especially with the new level 2 coming out. It's really cool. I think it's if you control like an earth and a water, you can like special summon it back from the graveyard as well. It's really nice. So moving away from this deck and onto a deck that we're all very familiar with, Altergeist. So just because it's not in our meta doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prepared for it. And I've been seeing this deck catching a lot of people off guard, especially at the bigger events. So definitely go ahead and Crow or Bell, whatever they're going to go ahead and Manifestation. Manifestation can bring back some pretty crazy cards, being the Meluseek, the Multi-Faker, the Silcoitus. You just really don't want these cards to really be able to just come back and be a problem, right? So be prepared for that. Also go ahead and Ash Veiler or Imperm the Multi-Faker. If you see the Marionette first, I would always go ahead and Veiler or Imperm that, because that's only going to get them to their protocol, and then all of a sudden your negates don't matter anyways. So make sure that you cut off the line of the protocol as soon as possible. Also using cards like Ash on Meluseek, because this is really impactful since they're going to get to their Multi-Faker anyways. They're just going to go ahead and shut this off before it even happens. This deck can be pretty hard to play against, but just make sure that, especially if they have cards like Personal Spoofing, you really want to make sure that once they shuffle away for cost, that you're going to use cards like Ash or Ogre on that, especially because that makes this deck go down on card advantage, and it's really hard for this deck to be able to regain that card advantage. The next deck that I have for you today is going to be Raidraptor. So this is going to be a mix of both Raidraptor and Blackwing, considering all the support that we're getting toward the end of the year. That's actually very good, and I just want to make sure that you're very familiar with what the cards do and how to hand trap them, just in case you do end up playing against this deck when all the support does come out. So definitely go ahead and Veiler or Imperm the Ystrix. This denies them a free summon from the deck, and also being able to get them their rank up spell, which is what this deck thrives on. And also hitting the Ystrix sometimes is just a pass turn. This is such an impactful hit, and this card is such a key piece in their combo. Also being able to Ash the Forstrix, which is crazy because literally every monster in the deck is a winged beast. So just going ahead and ashing the Forstrix is really huge because it really does deny them one of their key combo pieces. So I really do like these hand trap spots here, because especially the Ystrix, like I said, it can literally be a pass turn against this deck. So moving on from this one though, we do have Shaddoll. So Shaddoll is really interesting because it was really meta right after the structure deck, and then it kind of fell off, and then we got Schism, and then it just became Invoke Shaddoll Lugmatica, right? We didn't really see any pure variants anymore. But just like Despia, this deck can utilize Super Poly very well. And the fact that Snow's in the game again, we also have the ability to send it off of the Shaddoll Fusion. And so I really think that this deck still has a lot of potential. And after another support card or two, I could actually see this becoming a meta deck again. I still really like the variant where you play Brave Shaddoll, and then you're able to trigger your Shaddolls off of like the Fateful Adventure. And I think that's really strong, because you even play in upwards like 2 Fateful Adventure just to make sure that you see it, so that you can get your engine going as soon as possible, and then your dolls aren't like just dead in your hand, right? So I think that it has a lot of potential, and if we ever see this in the meta again, I just want to make sure that you have a reference guide in this video to know how to hand trap it. So if they use Shaddoll Schism on activation, you can bell it, and then it actually sends the Schism to the graveyard. If it's already face up and you bell it, you just negate it for that one time. So that's why I like Ghost Ogre as well. If it's already face up, you can Ogre it. If it's on activation, you can bell it. So it's really whatever hand trap is more respected in the format is the one that you play around. Also, ashing the Shaddoll Fusion is really strong, but if they ever use the effect of Wendy first, and they have a Shaddoll Fusion that they haven't used yet, or you don't know if they have one, then you can always just go ahead and ash the Wendy, like I'm saying with the Brave Shaddoll build. If they just have Fateful Adventure and then they pitch Wendy, sometimes you're just more inclined to just go ahead and ash the Wendy. But you can also just go ahead and Imperm or Veiler the Construct on summon. But sometimes if they just hard summon the Winda, you just want to hold that Imperm for your turn, so you don't just outright lose to a Winda. But moving on past Shaddoll, we are going to go to Dark Magician. So a lot of these decks, I just want to make sure that we have some kind of reference to, because even though they're pretty uncommon, these are decks that we can still see at some point being played, and even at any kind of a local level, they can still be pretty popular. So to start off with this deck, you definitely want to hold Ash for things like Red Eyes Fusion, which is very common in this deck. So make sure that you have an answer for that if you have a problem with Dragoon. Also, being able to use cards like Ghost Ogre against the second effect of Dark Magical Circle whenever they're going to go ahead and try to banish a card that you control. Using cards like Bell on Eternal Soul is huge, because that just combos really well with their Dark Magical Circle. And then also using cards like Imperm or Veiler on the Magician's Rod, also just very impactful. Moving on from this though, we have Infernoble. So Infernoble is a deck that we've seen in and out of the format that I think that it's still really relevant to talk about because of the fact that so many people are still trying to make the deck work, and it still has a lot of key combo components, especially cards like Isolde. Any 2 warriors into an extender is pretty insane, right? So having the Ash, the Veiler, the Imperm for the second effect of Isolde, usually now the combo is just summoning Dolphin and then doing more of like a Gearfried control, and I really like that too because I think that Gearfried's insane, especially if you can keep the equips up, but it's still just not the same deck that it used to be. Also, not having cards like Auroradon, you know, they lost the Link Cross a while ago, no Smoke Grenade, so the deck has gotten multiple hits, and maybe we'll see more Infernoble support in the future, but as for now, the deck is still pretty lackluster. The other way to hit the deck is going to be belling Renaud's effect, because the deck is really turning into Gearfried Turbo to get as many equip spells to it as possible, and this is something that can be pretty hard to deal with, especially because it can be targeted, it can be just for big card effects, and then you got to deal with the equip spells before you can deal with the Gearfried, and then that's a monster negate, and it also steals monsters when it goes to battle. So it's pretty insane, and I just always want to make sure that when they're sending the Gearfried through combo, that you just go ahead and bell Renaud's effect to try and add it back. And for the last deck that we have here, it's Virtual World. And so I really like Virtual World as a deck, but it's just really far out of the meta right now. And for whenever it does come back into the game, I really want you to be able to be prepared for it and know exactly how to hand trap it. So ashing cards like Lulu is really important, and not the King Long in the graveyard, because I feel like a lot of people tunnel on the King Long, but then if they already open up the Lulu, then you get punished for not ashing the Lulu. Also, just going ahead and belling out the Lao Lao, which is really insane too, because that's just another card that's just free extension for them. And then holding things like Imperm for your turn against Shen Shen, because Shen Shen is crazy to play against. Being able to banish a lot of cards is just really problematic for a lot of different decks. So I want to make sure that you are prepared for this. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoyed today's video. Today was definitely a longer one, and if you're not already part of my Discord community, definitely go ahead and join that. Follow me on Twitch and Twitter, and then if you want a coaching session over on Metafy, definitely go over there and check out what I have to offer. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to PM me on Discord. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I love making videos like this to help you improve at the game and help you just really understand what the meta is and where to hand trap and just, you know, how to just improve as a player. So I appreciate each and every one of you, and thank you all so much.